Well, thank you so much and welcome to the Voice of America. We're really grateful that you came over from the State Department to the Voice of America this morning.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
What do you know about the situation in the Uzbek capital, and do you have any information other than what everybody else has about the condition of President Islam Karimov?
We've seen the reports that others have and the official statement by the government, and that's really the information that we have as well. We wish the president and his family well and hope for good health in the end. And that's really all we know at this point, and I can't speculate on anything further.
Various succession scenarios have been discussed for a very long time, as you know, especially when it comes to Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. And many see this as a pivotal moment. And many people might also be wondering about what would be the best scenario as far as the United States is concerned.
Well, that's something I'm not going to speculate on and get into hypothetical scenarios. All I'll say is that we consider ourselves a friend of Uzbekistan and the people of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan as well, of course. We support the country's independence and its sovereignty, and we'll continue to develop that friendship under any scenario.
So no matter what happens, you want to maintain the current level of cooperation and the relationship? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, we'd like to develop our partnerships in the region and continue to do so in the future.
Remember our 2010 interview when you and I talked about, right after the ethnic riots and tragedy in Kyrgyzstan, where you explained the American interests and goals in the region. I've interviewed many people, and not everyone in Washington can clearly explain what America really wants in the region. So as the countries of the region celebrate 25 years of independence, you being the point man to the region, what are the interests right now, and what are the goals that you have to keep your full attention on?
There's a lot of continuity in the goals, so what I say now may not sound that different from what I said 6 years ago, but I am more focused now than I was then on Central Asia itself, because I think when you interviewed me then, I had
the administrator for U.S. assistance.
For all the assistance, and it was a much broader region, including the Balkans and the whole former Soviet space. But I would put it this way. First of all, there are sort of two underlying fundamental interests the U.S. has in Central Asia. One goes back really to the breakup of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s, and that is we want the states of the region to be prosperous. We want them to be independent and sovereign, and that independence and sovereignty is something that we've supported straight through administrations. There's really a direct line over the past 25 years. The second interest we have, which I think has been there from the beginning of independence, but really came into sharp focus after the events of 9/11 and what followed. And that is that we want stability. We want these countries to be able to be secure and not become havens for terrorist activity. We saw what happened in Afghanistan in the 1990s and what that resulted in terms of a threat to our national security, and we don't want the same to play out in Central Asia. So really the independence and sovereignty goal and the stability goal and the not becoming havens for terrorism are the underlying interests that the U.S. has in the region. In order to achieve those interests, or to see those interests be fulfilled, we think that there are three main areas that we need to work on with our partners in Central Asia. The first is security. We do a number of things to try to bolster the security of the countries in the region, from providing training to providing some equipment and providing some just knowledge and skills about how to defend borders, how to develop a security apparatus that works. The second area is economics. We understand that these countries can't stay stable and can't maintain their independence unless they succeed economically, unless they can deliver for their population. And we believe that in order to succeed economically, there needs to be internal reform. That is, the economies have to function better internally, and they have to be better connected to the outside world and to one another. That means better flow of goods, trade over borders, and better infrastructure as well. The third area, just to finish that, the third objective that we think is key is good governance. That is, these countries need to develop the institutions and the kind of policies that will allow for effective government that delivers for its citizenry, and also accountable government that is transparent and accountable to its population. So those are really the three objectives that we, again, in partnership with the countries in the region, are trying to achieve. The economic one, the security one, and the good governance one, to support these long-term interests that we have in the region of stability and independence and sovereignty.
And to what extent do you feel like you have found the common ground with these countries when it comes to these goals? How mutual are these goals?
I think we've achieved some confluence of interests, some commonality of assessment of what the situation is and what's required. But we're not all the way there, and we may never get all the way there. I mean, the reality is, that countries come at these issues from different perspectives, different historical legacies, and so on. But we certainly have active and open conversation about these goals all the time in our bilateral relations. And I think we've come a long way to finding common ground, even though we're not there and we may never completely get there.
You're a professional diplomat and you've been doing this for a long time. What are the best ways to achieve these goals based on your experience? And if we were to specifically look at Central Asia, tactically?
The best way from our perspective and from my own experience, as you say, over many years now of working with foreign countries, is to develop ties at all levels of our governments and societies, first of all. That is, to have a lot of interaction, and I mean meetings between diplomats, of course, but also the whole spectrum, businesses dealing with businesses, universities dealing with universities, citizen to citizen. All of that is important, and it helps to develop that common perspective of what our common challenges are and how to tackle them, how to deal with them.
So not just government to government, but you want people to people.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that's a key element that's a tactic, so to speak, in developing this common sense of what needs to be done. I think it's also important to engage and to try to achieve all of those three things that I talked about in parallel with one another. That is, we don't say that unless we've made a certain amount of progress in one area, we're not going to work in the other areas. We work in all of them together in parallel, and we see them as mutually reinforcing too. That's an important element.
So no conditions.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say no conditions. That may be too extreme a case. That is, there are certain, for example,
things are always tied up to each other.
Things are linked with each other, and there is we have some legal issues that we confront in our country, some restrictions in legislation adopted by our Congress that sometimes constrain what we can do. But the important thing to me is that we not view it as sort of zero sum. That is, unless that progress in one area doesn't come at the expense of another area, or vice versa.
Any success stories that you look at and you say, wow, I'm really happy we achieved that with this specific country, with Uzbekistan, for example?
If I look across the spectrum of the countries that were in the region, I'd point to a few things as I think success stories in the relationship and in their own achievements. I think Kyrgyzstan, for example, has achieved quite a bit in terms of developing its democratic institutions. There's a ways to go. I think the people in government of Kyrgyzstan recognize that themselves, but holding several rounds of free and fair elections, developing a sense of constraints on the different branches of government, checks and balances, as we would refer to it here, and also having a very robust civil society that has a voice and really has an influence over what happens in the country. And those are achievements of Kyrgyzstan itself, of the people and the government of Kyrgyzstan, I don't think I'm not going to say it's a credit to the United States per se or other countries. It's really their achievement. I would say that over the years, though, we have supported that development in a lot of ways. We talked about some of these 6 years ago, probably, when we talked about our assistance to Kyrgyzstan. But I think it is in some sense, a shared achievement.
Do you feel like that assistance, $45 million that U.S. provided at that time, has it borne any fruits?
Well, sometimes it's hard to judge results or impact of assistance because you don't know what would have happened without it. So it's sort of, as they say, you can't prove a negative. So I would say that the fact that since 2010, Kyrgyzstan's development has been relatively stable, that they've had several successive rounds of elections for parliament and also, at least once for president and soon to be another election for president, that have passed in a good manner, free and fair and stable sort of election process. That is a testament again to the people of Kyrgyzstan, but it's also I think there's some connection to our assistance, to the various kinds of assistance that we've provided to the electoral process. Similarly, while the economy there has not performed as well as I'm sure they would like it to, overall the economic growth that has been achieved, would it have been worse if not for our assistance? Quite possibly. Again, we can't take the credit for all the good things that have happened, but I think were it not for both the reconstruction aid that we gave and then the kind of economic reform assistance we've had over the past 6 years, things most likely would have been worse. So yes, I think there is some, you can point to some positive impact. The other thing, going back to your earlier question about success stories and so on, I look at some of the things that have happened in Kazakhstan, including last year when Kazakhstan entered the WTO, as being a shared success. That is something where the U.S. over a number of years strongly supported that effort, provided various kinds of technical assistance, and then also was involved in the actual negotiations in the end to get an agreement. And it was, I think a tribute to, again, primarily the efforts of the government of Kazakhstan, but also the support we provided that they achieved that goal. So, as I look around the region, there's probably a lot of other small successes, micro successes that I could point to if we had more time. But I think overall, there's definitely been some positives.
Washington is increasing its assistance to the region as of 2017, right?
A small increase for the region. It wasn't huge over what Congress provided in 2016, but in compared to 2015 and preceding years, it was definitely an increase.
What are the best ways to provide assistance? What kinds of assistance do you think U.S. should be providing to Central Asia? More effective ways of doing it?
Well, I think
because U.S. does not give suitcases filled with money, right? I mean, to the governments of Central Asia, it's not like you're giving cash.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't. That's not the way we provide assistance in Central Asia, and generally not in most of the world. There are some cases here and there where we actually provide budget support, not in the form of suitcases of money, but in other ways that funds are transferred. And in very rare cases, we've done that even in the region that I used to work on in my old job, but not in Central Asia. And so what we found to be effective over the years is a combination of providing expertise that we have developed over the years from our own experience, and that is it covers a very broad range of areas, everything from governing institutions, how to run a ministry or how to run a court system or a judicial system, to business knowledge, business know-how. And I think everyone knows in the world that American business, American private sector is extremely effective and full of all kinds of innovation and important skills. And we've found ways of providing that knowledge and that experience to other countries. It can be through exchanges where you're actually sending people, American farmers or American small business people, to the country to provide that kind of knowledge, or the other way around, sending people from Kyrgyzstan or Uzbekistan to the United States. It also has often taken the form of providing financing or modes of financing, microcredit and different kinds of loan programs to support businesses. But it's, in general, that kind of know-how and information and skill development that I think, do really well at. And sometimes we've also, over the years, been able to add to the kind of, I guess you could say, the software, the brain power and the knowledge transfer, some elements of infrastructure or equipment or things that add to that skill set. So, for example, in the health area, while we've done a lot of training and providing the kind of techniques, we've also provided equipment over the years, diagnostic equipment, testing for tuberculosis, for example. I know that's technology that sort of supplements the training. So I think that's where we're most effective. We're not going to be building dams and bridges and highways for the most part. Although I would say on that, as an important point.
China is doing that.
China's doing that. China's doing that. International financial institutions are doing it. I would point out that sometimes I think the U.S. doesn't get the credit that we might be getting or should be getting for the contributions we make to the international financial institutions, which in turn provide the infrastructure support. The World Bank, the Asia Development Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and so on.
So U.S. is still contributing financially.
So we're contributing, but indirectly in that sense. But in general, we're not going to be, whether it's suitcases of money or other ways, we're not going to be providing that kind of assistance.
How about the military assistance? The State Department still oversees that part of the assistance too, right?
We do. There's a number of programs that provide security assistance, as we call it more broadly. Sometimes it's our Defense Department who's actually doing the training or providing the assistance. But there are other agencies and other parts of even in the State Department that are doing it too. And it's not just to the military, sometimes it's to the police or to the border services, the border guards. But in that area, we've done quite a bit over the years, and a lot of it is, again, the software, so to speak. It's not necessarily equipment. We do some of that, but a lot of it is having our police officers, our military people actually go out and provide training and provide the kind of knowledge of how to secure your country that we've perfected over the years. And what I've seen myself, because I go and visit the border sites or go to the the Ministry of Defense buildings and so on, and talk to our counterparts, to our partners, and they are universally positive about the kind of assistance they get from the United States. They feel like it's practical, it's usable, and it's appropriate for what they need. That it's provided in a very targeted way.
So it is what they want, basically.
Right, it's what they want, and it's obviously the U.S. military has a reputation around the world as being an extremely effective fighting force and very well, very capable, and so they come in with a good reputation to start with. But again, afterwards, when I talk to people after the training has happened or whatever, I get really, really positive reactions to the quality of the assistance.
And we know that they want more.
They do generally.
They want more.
They do
military
generally want
assistance
more.
in general.
Yeah.
And what are the conditions, or what do you tell them when they ask for more? Whether it's about border security or just in general reforming the military.
So, I guess one of the constraints we have going in is that there's not a lot of money budgeted for this sort of thing in Central Asia. somewhat to my regret, because I, am an advocate for this region that I focus on, our budgets are very small. So that's a constraint going in, and means that we can't, there's no blank check, so to speak. But also, we work with countries to try to develop certain capabilities that we think, which they've told us they need and which we think we can help them with. A lot of that is about border security, because secure borders are something that everyone can agree are important and which our own policy supports. We're not about increasing capacity of countries to, for example, carry out offensive operations against neighbors. That is not at all what our assistance is aimed at, and the kind of capacity we're building is not doing that. And so I'm not saying we get requests of that type, but were we to get such a request, we wouldn't be able to fulfill it.
But at the same time, anything that you can provide them can be used for any purposes that or this government chooses to, right?
Well, not necessarily. No, I mean and I'm not a military expert on on various kinds of equipment and so on. But our experts tell me, and they explain. They don't just assert this; they explain what they mean. That there are certain training and certain technologies and types of equipment that are suited for certain purposes. So it's
like to be used against terrorists
or
extremists.
For example, I mean, it isn't the case that anything can be used for anything. The other important point here, though, is that we have pretty rigorous end-use monitoring built into our programs. So, for example, if we provide a type of equipment to a country, it comes with the strings attached to it, which is that we get to go in periodically in months and years following to check on where it is and how it's being used. That just comes with the package that's provided.
The fight against extremism, let's say violent extremism and terrorism, has been one of the biggest issues that you've been focusing on, with Central Asian governments. We know that you have increased the pressure a little bit on religious freedom. So you've been talking to the governments about tolerance, soft-handed approach when it comes to dealing with the threats, with whatever they see as threats. And I have had some interesting conversations with some officials in the region. The general view, when you sort of explore the views in Central Asia, is that, well, nobody really understands the level of the threat that we're facing. America doesn't always appreciate that well. How do you deal with that? Because they feel like there is no soft-handed approach when it comes to dealing with terrorists and extremists. Mm-hmm. That they know better, they know who the enemies are on the ground, and that there is actually, they also argue that there is no other way to deal with these people. You cannot be tolerant with them, they say. You cannot be soft-handed. Mm-hmm. Can you share any of those conversations, or I guess brainstorming sessions you have with us? Because these are real conversations.
These are real conversations, certainly within each of the countries, and sometimes in our own dialogue with the countries of Central Asia. I can't share specific conversations. Obviously, that would not be in the spirit of diplomatic discourse. But I can tell you that in general, we do have very frank and direct kinds of talks with governments in the region about a whole range of issues in the area that you might label human rights or the human dimension, and religious freedom is part of that, definitely. I think what you're referring to, and what everyone is seeing, is that we have this process each year, the International Religious Freedom Report, that's issued. And as part of that process, some countries are designated as countries of particular concern, or CPC, as we call it. And those decisions are not taken lightly, of course, at all by us. We realize it's very serious to put a country on that list of the countries of particular concern. And they also follow a lot of dialogue with the governments in the region about our concerns with the way that religious believers are treated, religious minorities and others, and also sharing our perspective on why certain policies we think are actually counterproductive to the goals. The goal is a shared one, and we agree on the goal. The goal is to allow people to practice their faith, but also to protect the security of the country and to ensure that radical extremist groups don't gain followers in the country and who might commit terrorist acts, and just to make sure that the citizens are safe and secure. So that there's no question that the goal is the same. The question is how to achieve that goal. And I would acknowledge your point, which is that there is sometimes a different perspective on how best to achieve that goal and what the balance should be. It's really about achieving a balance. We struggle with this in our own country between freedom on the one hand and security on the other. They're sometimes in tension with each other. And so I would say we probably don't always see eye to eye on what the balance should be. We continue to believe that restricting peaceful religious practice and belief in the long run, restricting it in ways that lead people to look for alternatives, perhaps, or seek more radical solutions, is counterproductive. That is, it will lead in the end to a defeat of the other goal of security, and that's something that we don't always agree on with our counterparts in the governments of Central Asia, but we always try to find common ground, and even in those cases where we have, for example, designated countries on this list, we continue to talk to them about it. It's not
you're
like
not necessarily sanctioning them.
Well, what's happened is the way the law is designed, you can be designated on the list, and then it's the discretion of the Secretary of State to waive the sanctions. There are sanctions under the law, but there's also a waiver I think the standard is if it's seen as in the national interest of the United States to waive the sanctions, you can. And we have, until now, we have always waived those sanctions for the countries of Central Asia.
And can you explain the national security part of it? How does that relate directly?
What the sanctions would affect is our ability to provide assistance. And our judgment has been, and when I say our, it's a State Department decision that is made by the Secretary of State. Our judgment has been that the benefit we gain in terms of our own national security from providing the assistance outweighs the cost of continuing to provide the assistance. So yeah, it's basically a national interest argument that's made for waiving the sanctions.
From the very beginning, from 1991, when the countries of Central Asia became independent, the United States has always aspired to see free, democratic societies in the region. A quarter of a century later, we still have more or less authoritarian regimes with one of the worst human rights records. What is next in terms of promoting democracy and human rights in the region? Do you think that the way America has done has worked to some extent, perhaps? I mean, you talked about Kyrgyzstan. I know this is a challenge for you. I'm wondering about the challenges you face in terms of promoting freedom in Central Asia, because you get a lot of criticism, you face a lot of criticism, you have dealt with it over the years, but let's talk about the challenges. Mm-hmm. How difficult it is to promote freedom.
Well, I started out by talking about the three objectives of our policy in the area of security and economics and good governance. And I also said that we believe it's possible and in fact necessary to pursue all three in parallel with each other. I think it's fair to say, and I'd be the first to admit, that the good governance area, that basket, has been maybe the most challenging over the years, and of the three. And you can measure progress in a variety of ways, but it's one that we certainly haven't made the progress that the countries of the region haven't made the progress that we would have liked to see in that third area. it is a challenge because not just because you are dealing with countries who sometimes have a different perspective than we do, as we were discussing earlier on the question of religious freedom, but also because we are subject to a lot of criticism, as you put it, from our own civil society here in the United States and sometimes from our Congress for not doing enough in this area. And I think the way we respond to that criticism, the way I've responded to it, is to say, look, we share the same goal here. We want to see improvements in all of these areas. We want to see them because, first of all, it's consistent with American values and the way we project our foreign policy in the world. But just as importantly, we want to see them because we think it's in the interest of stability in this region in the long run. It's, going back to what I was saying about the balance between religious freedom and security and concerns about extremism, many of these policies can be counterproductive over the long run and lead to more instability. And we've seen this in other parts of the world over time. So, experience tells us that this is not necessarily the right approach to ensure stability. So we say to the critics, and there are many, that there are always many critics, that we agree on the goal. The question is how best to achieve that goal and how to get there. And our approach has been and remains that we should address these issues head on. They should be part of our diplomatic dialogue with countries. We should press them on the need to make improvements in these areas. But at the same time, we should pursue other elements of our relationship together in parallel and build trust, build mutual confidence, and over time we expect and hope and expect that this approach will bear fruit. And again, as I said, you can point to small areas of progress if you look around the region, and some not just small, some big ones, some smaller ones around the region, and that gives me that bolsters my confidence that in the long run we will see progress.
As a demonstration to show that mutual trust and confidence, you introduced C5+1 in 2015. And you recently held ministerial level talks in Washington, which you and your colleagues coined as a historic event, because this was for the first time you had 5 foreign ministers of the region come together in Washington, and they sat down with Secretary Kerry, and this was a good way to show that the region wants to move forward as one integrated part of the world. How confident are you that this initiative will continue, or the U.S. will continue to work on this as the president, changes next year? And also, how committed do you think that the countries are, realistically speaking? Because sometimes it feels like the United States is more excited or optimistic, and we have talked about this before, about the integration than the region itself.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, in terms of how well established the C5+1 is and whether it will continue, which was part of your question, I believe that now, having had really 3 meetings of the ministers, because there was a sort of early meeting in New York last September on the margins of the UN General Assembly, then the Samarkand meeting, and now Washington, that we're beginning, I'm now able to say that this is a real thing that's going to last. I really do believe that it's established. And I also think that the 5 countries of the region feel the same way. And I'm judging that based on their participation, which has been, not only do they show up, but they've been very actively participating and coming up with ideas and suggestions. And also just based on the specific things that I hear from the foreign ministers and other officials in those governments. I do think they see it as a useful forum, although I'd say they also want to see it prove itself as being useful in a practical way, and it hasn't done that yet, I would acknowledge. But they think it's useful, and they see it as something that is a kind of natural outgrowth of our discussions over a long period of time. Their discussions with the United States over a long period of time. So I think the countries of the region are invested in it. The United States is invested in it, and it will continue. Now, we do have a transition coming up in our country, a political transition, and one of the first agenda items for us with the new team that will come in early next year will be to talk about the C5+1 and explain the benefit we believe that is to be gained from it. But what I have seen over time, in my own career, going from, I started in the Clinton administration in the late 90s and then saw the transition to the Bush administration and then from the Bush to the Obama, is especially with respect to Central Asia and the broader Eurasia region, a lot of continuity, more than you might expect sometimes by the rhetoric that you hear in campaigns and so on. A lot of continuity. The basic underlying interests remain the same, the ones that I started out with at the beginning.
The goals in general.
The goals in general, and I, because of that, I'm confident that the new team, the new leadership, will see this as an important investment of our time and diplomatic resources. So I expect it to continue. I think that the important focus right now, especially for the rest of this year and early next, is to get the projects that we announced in early August launched and really started, because it's those projects that are going to give substance, that are going to give a reality to this format of C5+1.
You have several critics, many critics, I would say, in Washington too, who say that, well, America hasn't really given enough attention to Central Asia, especially not enough attention by the White House. American presidents have never visited the region, and there were some expectations that this president could, or at least the vice president would go visit the region. How do you feel when you hear those kind of criticisms that, if president has never paid attention, has never paid a visit to the region, it's not that important? And you know how important Central Asia is as far as, Washington is concerned. Mm-hmm. What shows interest?
Yeah. So your question, how do I feel? Obviously, I would like as much attention as possible to be paid to Central Asia, because it's what I focus my everyday work on, and which I care deeply about. At the same time, I do think it's significant that Secretary Kerry made the trip he made last fall. That was a real sign of U.S. interest in the region and commitment. I mean, for the Secretary of State to devote a week of his time to travel to 5 countries and spend, significant time in them is a sign of interest and a recognition of why the region matters to the United States. I also think that, Central Asia is, in some ways, doesn't always get the attention it should, because it's been relatively stable, and I think it is just a fact. It's a reality of foreign policy that I've learned over the years, that a lot of attention goes to regions that are in turmoil or where there's a lot of violence, unrest, and so on. And so I guess to some extent I count my blessings sometimes that I don't get more attention from the highest levels every single day to my region. But seriously, I think that the underlying interests that I identified at the very beginning remain in the minds of not only the State Department but the White House, the Pentagon, and other parts of our government, and will continue to motivate attention being paid to the region in the future. Again, it's not going to be equivalent to some other parts of the world, but then there are lots of countries in the world that don't get, presidential visits or other, kinds of that level of attention. And I prefer to focus on what we have, which is very significant, I would say. Not only the Secretary's visit last fall, but this ministerial we just had in August. And I think as you know, when the ministers were here, in addition to the meeting with the Secretary, they also had an event at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce that was chaired by the Deputy Secretary of Commerce Department, Bruce Andrews. They also attended a reception in honor of the independence of the 25th anniversary of the independence of the countries that was hosted by our Secretary of Energy, Secretary Moniz. And so throughout the U.S. government, there is, I would say, a significant amount of attention being paid to Central Asia.
We hear again and again that the United States will not compete with Russia and China in the region, that U.S. sees itself as a unique partner, and it plays a completely different role than Russia and China. What does that mean? That sort of sounds like defeatist sometimes.
Well, it's not intended to be defeatist, or because, I mean, defeatist implies, again, that it's a contest, right? Mm-hmm. That there's a winner and a loser. Mm-hmm. Someone is victorious and someone is defeated. And that's not the way we view it. It's not, we think that we have a lot of common goals with other countries in the region, including Russia and China. The stability goal I talked about, the economic connectedness goal, you know, the idea that these countries should be more prosperous and should succeed. I think these are shared goals, and our belief is that our relationships and our activity in the region is not coming at the expense of anyone else. And we hope that other countries will have a similar attitude, even though we know that they sometimes don't.
No, they don't. They don't. But they are watching. I mean, they're closely watching every step that America takes in the region. You know that. And you cannot stop people from speculating too. I mean, especially those who live in the region. You know, they're always comparing. Like, this is what we're getting from Russia, this is what we're getting from China, and this is what we're not getting from the United States, even though the U.S. is so far geographically and may not be willing to get involved in so many other things.
Yeah. Well, you know, I think the approach that I've always tried to take in dealing with international partners is to say to them, look, I'm going to tell you what we can do, what our resources allow us to do, what our diplomatic capital allows us to do, and I will not promise anything that we can't deliver. But I will also tell you that I will deliver what we promise. And that's the approach that we take in Central Asia too. We're not going to make, you know, grandiose claims about what the United States will do in the region, but what we say we're going to do, we'll do. And I think over time that approach gets credit, that it's appreciated, and it builds trust.
But at the same time, when America is in, people tend to over-expect, right? Because you're the superpower, so people want more. They expect more.
There is that tendency. I've seen it myself, especially in my old job doing foreign assistance. I constantly got that kind of expectation. And I think, again, you just have to be clear with people. You just have to say up front, this is what we're able to do based on you know, whatever funding we have, whatever ability to project U.S. role in the region, and you know, not contribute to building those expectations beyond what can be delivered.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for talking to us.
You're welcome.